Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Archangel Inc. Live number 58. It is great to be here. And Jordan, it's great to see you. Welcome.
Thanks, Rob. Good to see you too. Ready to talk about this pretty awesome topic.
Yeah. You know, it's a little bit of an unusual topic. It doesn't happen all the time. But if you are a published author and time passes, maybe you have multiple books out, you might think at some point, hey, I need to kind of update my book. Maybe there's something about it that isn't quite as accurate or representative of my thinking at the present time. So, when do I update my book? How do I do that? What are the logistics? Are there things to consider? Well, we wanted to address this. And it was in part because, as you were mentioning, Jordan, we have some publications that are ourselves that are out there that have been out for a few years and aren't necessarily as current as if we were to have written them today. And so just kind of navigating what it looks like to make those updates and create content that is going to really speak to our audience in terms that we feel good and comfortable and confident in.
Yeah, I think it's a really good question because sometimes as you're writing a book, it's a good thing to consider as well. Okay, I want to write this to be more evergreen, and we're going to talk about what that means and maybe some strategies for how to do that. But it's a good thing to think about as you're writing a book, but then also we're hoping to be able to answer these questions surrounding, hey, I have a book that I wrote 3 years ago. I don't know if it's relevant here. What do I do? How do I think about that? So we're going to talk about that tonight.
Yeah, absolutely. So the first question that we have is, why might you need to update a previously released title? I know we covered a couple of things, but thoughts on that, Jordan?
Yeah, it's really, for me, the main reason is your content's just out of date, or if you have things in your book that just aren't relevant anymore. If we're going to be talking about self-publishing, if you have a book out there that's talking about how to publish on CreateSpace or another thing like that, hey, that's actually changed. CreateSpace is not a thing anymore. It looks very different. It's KDP print now. I probably have a reference to CreateSpace in my book, in the book launch Gladiator. I'm not 100% sure, but that's something I should look at and think about updating. That's what we're talking about here. Things that are just not relevant. If you have links in your book that are just not live anymore, maybe that website or service you linked out to for whatever reason is just not active, or maybe they just changed designs or they changed websites completely. That's something you can think about going through and updating as well. Generally, you can also release it if you find significant errors in your book. I wouldn't necessarily go through the pain if you find one proofreading error, but log those errors as you find them, and maybe you can decide what's a big enough change for you to go through the trouble. But that's can be another option as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So the notes that I have here under why might you need to do that? Content is outdated or the industry has changed, as you mentioned. I'm going through and transcribing some of my old YouTube content here, and I mentioned, KDP, CreateSpace versus KDP print, and again, as you mentioned, there is no debate between those because one of those doesn't exist anymore. Yep. And mentioning again, promotional websites, things that may have worked at one point, maybe they've lost their efficacy. I know with Book Launch Gladiator, for example, there are a number of strategies that are mentioned, and the big picture is still relevant and still makes sense. But the particulars of, hey, I tried, A, B, C, D, and E promotions, and these are the good ones, and maybe, B and D don't exist anymore, and C is not very good, so it's only A and E left, or something like that. But yeah, another reason why you might have to update editions or update this content, publishing rights have transferred, and this has happened with Archangel Inc. I know that in the past we have previously published in-house, so authors would come to us and they would work with us on a royalty share basis. And at some point we switched our model over, so they retained their rights, all rights transferred over to them. So this book was going to have to be unpublished and then republished on their accounts. And so there are some logistics that went into doing all of that. So that's something to consider. And then if you want, at that point, you can also maybe make some changes, make changes to the interior so that no longer says published by Archangel Inc., make changes to perhaps the cover or other elements of the sales copy. But yeah, those are possibly another reason. And then the bigger purpose or another element to this is repurpose and salvage existing content for a new audience. So this kind of goes with that updating, outdated information. But you may decide that, hey, this old book and this other old book are they're not exactly right, but if I combine them and kind of repurpose that content and pull it together, maybe that constitutes a new edition or something that's an expanded and revised version of something out there before. So, in situations like that, it may make sense to publish or update a previously released work.
Yeah, I think that's a great consideration, especially if you're thinking about writing a new book or just putting something out there. Hey, should I go ahead and write just an entire new book about book launching, or should I take what I already have written, grab like the bare bones, don't need to reinvent the wheel as far as content, because there's a lot of good, as you were saying, Rob, there's some good like high level content, but maybe just some of the specifics don't match up anymore. And that's definitely where I would consider that. And you can save yourself time by doing that as well, instead of starting from scratch.
Yeah, no, great point. So let's jump on to the next thing here, which is what is evergreen content? And then I've got a little subheader underneath it, which is timeliness versus timelessness. So thoughts on any of those, Jordan?
Yeah, I love that way of describing it. It really, when you're looking at evergreen content, you're looking at the book that you don't have to go and republish. And there are ways to do that. Maybe it can be very difficult depending upon your niche and what you're writing in. If you're writing about how to launch a book, it is going to look different maybe in a couple of years. Like we said, there's going to be some high level strategies and some things you can do, some mindsets that are really important and they're most likely evergreen. But when you get into the specifics of a strategy, it can be hard to do that. But where you can, you want to do that as much as possible. Write books and build your content out so that it can be evergreen, so that it can be relevant 8-10 years from now.
Right. Yeah. When I think of evergreen versus, let's say, timely content, there are like seasonal books, for example. You're writing about what the most important thing to do for the holiday season in 2020. Probably not going to sell too many copies in 2021, 2022, and so on down the line. However, a lot of the books that we work on, that our clients work on, they're designed to have a little bit more of a shelf life. Their principles, practices, mindset approaches, ideas, and then even information or stories that don't expire. That you're not going to worry, oh, okay, I'm directing people over to a website that doesn't exist anymore, for example. So, in general, at least our publishing model tends toward timeless productions, because the authors that are working with us usually are investing, in many cases, several months of writing and, drafting their content and then working on it, revising it, really polishing it and putting a professional edge to it. This isn't something that is kind of a flash in the pan, get it out really quickly, capitalize on a little bit of short-term interest and then let it wither away. It's more something that you want to continue to put effort and time into and use as an ongoing source of revenue, source of credibility, expertise, tool for propagating your brand and all of that.
Yep. And with all that being said, I think, if you look at my book launch gladiator book, I have the year in there. I say how to do it in 2018. Well, that was great as far as being relevant and, timely for 2018. But when you start to get even further away from 2018, it starts to look, is this really relevant? People do have that question. So I think that's definitely something to consider when you go and especially create a title. I would rethink that now. But yeah, you live and you learn.
Right. And, just in terms of titling and making it relevant and appropriate, I mean, it may make sense to do that. And you see that a lot, I would say, on platforms like social media, like YouTube, other social media, best promotional strategies in 2020, best book launch service in 2020. That's going to help you achieve greater relevance in the moment, possibly just at the expense of long-term timeliness. I mean, you can always update it and hopefully have some content there to repurpose and re-release in upcoming years if that's kind of what your goal is. But yeah, just know that the more that you make it relevant for the moment, the less of a timeless quality it has, and conversely, the more of a timeless quality that it has, the less you're going to be able to capitalize on those short-term interests that people might have in a flash in the pan kind of way.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And just consider the how much time it's going to take you to go and update a YouTube post or a blog post. You can go in there and change the title, do those things potentially very quickly, depending if you have some design work in there. But you can update that pretty quickly. But when it comes to a book, it gets a little bit more challenging and difficult. So that's why we're sharing more of this evergreen approach versus, you don't want to have to update your book every 3 months.
Right. Yeah, it would be quite a challenge, and there are some logistical considerations that are involved there, and we can kind of touch on those in a little bit. So with that said, let's jump forward to next section, which is updating a current edition versus releasing a new edition. And I want to first throw up this, which is Amazon's updating guidelines, which I will include in the description down below. So you don't have to feel like you have to copy that from the screen. But yeah, what are the big picture sentiments that Amazon shares here, Jordan?
Yeah, so the big picture, if you're going to update your current edition, it's really going to be those proofing errors, or maybe you can change out a chapter. I would say a chapter or two potentially. Maybe update some other things. For me, that's updating from what I understand, that's what they would see as updating the current edition. Right. Releasing a new edition, Amazon says if the book is significantly changed. Right. What does significantly changed mean? Probably going to just be decided by you. Maybe you're changing out half the book. I gave the example to Rob before we jumped on this live. Maybe if I added 20,000 words, or I doubled the length of my book, or I added a completely new section on it, I would consider that a new edition, and Amazon probably would too. So you can kind of consider that for yourself, just depending on how much change your book is going through. But it's definitely just updating a current edition if it's just proofing or changing out some things.
Right, exactly. So yeah, and then for your strategizing, there may be some times where it's kind of marginal, and maybe, we talk about here. I'll go through a couple of these questions here that I have. So how much new content will you include? That's something to think about. Maybe it makes sense to include just an addendum chapter or a couple of addendum chapters. So for example, updates to the 2020 edition. I know in the past, working with Matt, the co-founder of Archangeling, he had a previously published work on his own website, but it was out for maybe a year and a half, and then he had new insight, new information. Maybe he made a couple of changes throughout the text, but the primary update was really in just an addendum chapter right at the very end, update to the 2016 version. And hey, here's how my thinking has changed. All of this other information is still relevant in A, B, and C ways, but I would shift my emphasis, in X, Y, and Z ways, and so forth. So, that could be another approach that you kind of look at to figure out whether it makes sense to update, or just kind of scrap it and give it a new edition altogether.
Yep, absolutely.
Cool. All right. So let's see. Another important element to this is the reviews and Amazon ranking information. So be aware that if you are creating a new edition, you may not be able to transfer over existing reviews and existing kind of search Amazon algorithm, search ranking information. So if your book is associated with a handful of keywords that really perform pretty well for you, and Amazon kind of knows like, hey, somebody's searching for this, we really should show them Jordan's book, then you might lose that when you have a new edition up there. Amazon doesn't necessarily know that, hey, this content is 65 or 75% the same. They just know, hey, this is a new title, this is a new listing, and it has its own set of associations. And you need to just be aware of that going forward. I mean, the story I shared with you earlier, Jordan, was when Archangeling transferred the rights over to a number of projects back to the authors, back to the creators. They unpublished their old editions. We went ahead, provided those new file or those source files to them. They republished, and lo and behold, in many cases, they lost their reviews. They lost their sales ranking. All of the associated benefits that maybe they had worked hard to accrue in terms of building their brand or visibility or reputation within Amazon's ecosystem, kind of went kaput. And we eventually realized that if we kind of staggered it, we were able to kind of parlay a little bit of that over. So, for example, we would first unpublish the digital edition. they would republish the digital edition on their end. You don't want to republish the new digital edition first because Amazon's system will recognize that you have that there's a duplicate title on there, and they'll contact you. They'll say, no, this looks like it's somebody else's material or a copy or something. Like, tell us that you have the publishing rights here, because otherwise it looks like you're just stealing somebody else's information. So, in many cases, we actually had to write them a letter saying, hey, we affirm that rights transfer has been authorized and so forth. So you unpublish your old edition first, your new edition, digital edition second. Then you ask Amazon to link your digital edition to the existing reviews of the paperback edition that you haven't unpublished yet. And then you unpublish the paperback edition, and then you republish your own paperback edition. And you reach out to them and say, hey, I'd like to associate this new ISBN with the existing ISBN. That one doesn't necessarily even go away. It might show up as unavailable to purchase new, but a secondary market may still exist. In many cases, it does. And so that book, that listing will still be out there. And that's going to be kind of your bridge and how you're able to, at least on the review front, retain that in terms of associating or keeping that association with keywords and within internal search algorithms. Amazon's not very transparent about that, so I can't tell you. I mean, we can sort of gauge based on how it performed. Like, yeah, I mean, I think it's still sort of was relevant and parlayed a little bit over, but you don't really know, and it's hard to say whether you would have sold more or less if you kept the original title before the rights transfer. So dealing with all of that, I mean, that's a question. If you're publishing a new edition versus just updating a current edition, you have to figure out all of that, and you have to figure out the logistics of it, which we'll get into a little bit more, even beyond what I just talked about. But then also whether it's worth it, whether that pain in the neck is going to, justify itself. Maybe your old book is underperforming. Maybe it's just not doing that great, and you're like, you know what, this new edition, it's better. Forget the old one. Like, let's give this a fresh start, and let's give this an opportunity to really stand on its own legs. And maybe I know a little bit more about reaching my market. Maybe I know a little bit more about how to promote it and get myself in front of eyes of prospective readers. Maybe I know more about my target audience. Great, all the more opportunity to really give a reboot and a fresh look at something that didn't quite reach its potential before. Maybe now it has a better chance to do that. So whichever direction you go in, just know that there are some concerns and some considerations, and you're going to try and want to have your eyes open going into it.
Yep, I think that's great, Rob. Just to sum up, if you are going to update your book, you don't have to worry about the switches and all that stuff. You can update it. Yeah, it's going to take you a little bit of time. There's some details there, but you can update that on Amazon, and that's fine. But if you want to just publish a whole new edition, that's where those considerations come in. That's where you're going to have to think about, is it really worth doing this and going through that struggle? Maybe I can get my reviews over, but I'm probably not going to get the rankings and those things. So hopefully that helps and sums it up a little bit.
Yep. Great. Excellent summary. So let's talk a little bit about updating logistics. And so just from the technical side, really, I mean, I mentioned a little bit of the Amazon publishing side, but questions like, how extensive are the updates? Are you going to have to reformat your entire project, or can you just update an existing file? And if you're working with us, with a service provider like Archangel Inc., in some cases, after a handful, couple of dozen like changes, it might make sense from a cost standpoint to just reformat altogether.
Mm-hmm.
I can speak to that in audiobook production. We had one project that we produced the audiobook for when we were publishing in-house, and then the author made some revisions, some changes, moved things around, and it ended up being, I would say, almost more work to kind of move and rework the existing audio content, take a sentence from here and move it over somewhere else, than it would have been to just pay the narrator to re-record it and start from scratch. So that's something to keep in mind. When you're handling all of that, there's going to be some of that those technical elements to updating it. Anything that you wanted to share on that, Jordan?
No, not on that. It's just a consideration.
Mm-hmm. So one thing that I will share is a link, archangelinc.com/Calibre, and that's Calibre RE, like the application that you can download, the free cross-platform application. And this is a video that I put up a week or so ago, but it was for Dale Roberts. He had an update to a book that he wanted to make just a small change to. And there is actually a way within Calibre to make that update within your finished file. So you don't have to actually go back to the source file and re-export it, and you don't have to reformat altogether. But you can make these changes. Now, it can be a little tricky if you want to do extensive changes and you kind of want to make sure that you know what you're doing in terms of the HTML coding and not disrupt anything. But if you're reasonably comfortable with it, and if you are not making too extensive any changes, then this could work adequately well, and it's easy. It's very straightforward. So that's something to keep in mind. So again, if, like you were saying, Jordan, if it's just like you notice 5 typos and they're kind of embarrassing, they're not deal breakers, but you just let me just go ahead and take care of that. You would be able to, at least in the ebook edition, using.
That's what I was gonna ask you, if it was so Calibre is just ebook. It's not. You can't update the print edition. Okay.
Correct. Yeah. Now there may be ways that I'm not familiar with in Calibre to format for a print edition, but it is really a digital book platform. Designed for that. So in that case, you will probably have to go back to your source file, whether that's a Google Doc or an MS Word doc or an InDesign source file, Vellum, any of these other applications that may be able to help you with the typesetting, the print typesetting. But Calibre would allow you to do that, at least for the digital edition.
Cool.
All right. And let's see, updating. So another thing to keep in mind is you're going to have to worry about, you're probably going to want to update all editions. So for us, we provide files in 4 different formats: the MOBI, the EPUB, the digital PDF, and the print edition. And sometimes more than one print edition. It might be a paperback and a hardcover edition. So if you have all of those formats out there, then if you make any updates, just know that you're going to have to re-export them in all 5 of those different, or 4, however many different formats. And so, and you can't just make a discrete change and expect that it's going to change everywhere. So you're thinking about making those changes and then uploading them to whatever platforms you're distributing on, whether that's Amazon KDP or, like we talked about before, Draft to Digital, to KDP Print, to Ingram Spark, etc. So just know that if you want to make a change, you might have to make a change, the same change many times across many different editions.
Yeah, and I think you could add the audiobook in there. That's a consideration. If you already have the audiobook done, then that's something to add there as well. And that's a whole different ballgame in updating. It's not just fixing it. Even if it was one proofing error in an audiobook, that's potentially a whole file that you need to go and play around with, and then figure out how to get into ACX or wherever you're publishing it. So there's a lot of considerations there.
Yeah, that's a great point. I love that. And we've had to do that before. I mean, we've had to republish on ACX, and it's a little bit of a process. They don't just open up your dashboard and allow you to go in and discreetly change a single item or a single section of a single file. In the past, they sent us basically an independent upload link, and we'd have to upload, I think, the entire audiobook, as we want it going forward. And basically, they re-upload the whole thing, so to avoid having to change individual chapters. So yeah, that's a great point. Audiobook can be another edition that has some complications when it comes to making updates.
Yeah, and I think that just helps with the discussion, even though it's considering, okay, that's even more I have to do. But then for me, as I'm thinking about this and potentially putting a second edition or just publishing a new book on like the book launching topic, I wasn't thinking about the audiobook when I was first thinking about this. So it's that extra, like, is it really worth that updating? Or hey, maybe that's just better if I just do a whole new book, even though it'll be the whole launching process and the reviews will change and all that will be different. It's just that the cost benefit scale there. How much of my time is going to be spent on just an update versus, hey, if I'm going to do all this work anyway, in some ways, consideration, maybe I'll just publish a whole new book, launch a whole new book, and then there's that new excitement. So yeah, no, great points. And again, we're sharing all of this not to dissuade you necessarily, but to allow you to go in with your eyes wide open to what's involved. It would be nice if it were totally easy and simple and discreet, but there are probably other considerations here. So just be aware of them. Okay, so another thing, and this is something that Amazon talks about on their
link, which I will include down below, which is notifying your existing customers. So if you update your digital edition, for example, if the notice or if the updates are significant enough, you can request that they basically send a push notification to everybody who has purchased your book and who has downloaded your book and say, hey, there have been significant revisions. Please make sure to download the latest edition to your device, wherever you're reading it at. But the paperback editions or the print editions, they're printed. They're done. There's nothing you're going to be able to do about it. So just know that that's you will want to let your customers know that, hey, there's a new edition. Maybe some of that information wasn't relevant. If you've downloaded the digital edition, you can access the new edition now, or buy the newly revised print edition if you want the most current hard copy version.
Yep.
Cool. So another thing here, I kind of mentioned that you can contact Amazon to link the new edition with your old listing. So again, when you're unpublishing and republishing and kind of going through that sequence and trying to ensure that you don't lose your rankings and your reviews and all of that, then you might need to contact Amazon and say, hey, the old ASIN associated with this ISBN, print edition was such and such. Can you make sure that it's linked up now to the new digital or the new ISBN and the new ASIN? So
yeah, I think the best thing to consider with that is if you're stuck or if you're not sure how to do something within the dashboard, don't be afraid to ask Amazon for help.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, they're generally pretty good about helping self-publishing authors. They know that we're providing content for their platform and sending people over. So yeah, they're usually pretty good about that.
Yeah, don't be surprised if you get, hey, we don't normally do this, but we'll do it for you. Typically that happens a lot, but they do that to cover themselves in case they come into a situation where they don't want to do or exactly. They're not able to. So yeah.
Yep, for sure. Cool. All right. So concluding thoughts here, and I'll just kind of run through them and then we can share. Many authors will face this issue over time. If you've published and continue to publish over time, if it isn't totally timeless, then you might have to think about updating or revising your edition at some point. It's important to not set it and forget it if we want our content to sell. Sometimes an update or rewrite is in order. So, we see that. We talk about this with marketing. You can't just put it out there and just kick back and let the royalty checks roll in. You have to be actively involved in it. And part of being actively involved is thinking, hey, is my content in need of some sort of update? And making sure that you're continuing to provide as much value as you can to your readers. How have you handled the issue of updating previously released books? What are your top tips and strategies? So thoughts on any of those, Jordan, as we wrap things up?
No, I just think, it's well, we say this, and you've probably heard it before about the whole evergreen content. We want to talk about that because that's the ideal, but it can be really hard to do that. I know it's difficult. I have older books in my personal development that there's some things that I don't necessarily do those particular things anymore. Maybe some of the stories are not as relevant as they used to be. That it could definitely use an update. So it's a very challenging thing to do as an author, but that's why we wanted to talk about it, because it is something that if you're not having to consider right now, if you're thinking about publishing a book or a couple, it's just something to think about now, but also to be ready for in the future.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Gone through this process before. If you've had to update your book or you're thinking about updating your book, let us know. Let us know your thoughts and how it went. What are the pros and cons as you're kind of weighing them and navigating them, and how are you kind of figuring out whether this makes sense for you. We'd love to hear from you. And as always, we'd love to hear your thoughts, your comments, anything that you're curious about, anything that we covered that like, hey guys, I want to hear more about such and such. We're happy to expand and share more information as best we can. Anything else that you wanted to add, Jordan?
No, I'm good. Just let us know if you have any questions. We're happy to help.
Yep. Excellent. All right. Well, thanks everybody. Hope to see you all on the next Archangel Link Live, and have a great evening.